And then the execution vehicles have to make the case that the answer is yes through some sort of transparent and objective way. When you do a transition, you go from an internal conversation to an external conversation, and the community is absolutely ready for that external conversation. They want it, they demand it, they've been doing it themselves. It's just it's time for some unity so that they do it with one voice to get to a good universal backlog, and we measure everything. Now, if this government is unable to ask those questions, if the government is unable to produce good wisdom in that, then you have to go from MVG V1 to MVG V2. You have to add new checks and balances or systems inside the government. And that's what we imagine is going to happen, is there's going to be this beautiful spiral where you start certain places and then you go to new places along the way. And every time you do it, you have more inclusion, more wisdom, more execution capability, more decision-making capability, and better decisions. That's the point of good governance, that you can get things done, but you get wise, good things done on a regular basis. What's also super cool about this structure is that this structure can act as a primary, secondary concern. And what I mean by that is that you have Cardano as your top level project. But then you have these other projects like Hydra, for example, Open Prism, Plutus as the language, because that's different, Marlowe. And just like Linux with the Hyperledger Foundation, and let me go and show you guys this because you might not be aware of it, and it's super cool. So if you go to hyperledger.org, you can take a look and see, wait a minute, Hyperledger is not just one thing. We all think Fabric. Well, actually, no, there's also Solang. I think that's on the Solana side. Noncreds, Bevel, Cacti, Calipercello, Firefly, Sawtooth, Indie, Fabric, Besu, Aries. You look at the full landscape. Look at all this stuff. So what it is a governance structure for how to handle a lot of projects. Well, if you are a dApp developer and you're doing some dApp stuff, maybe you don't want to have to figure out, God, how do I manage an open source project? How do I handle all this stuff? You now have a model for your dApps to plug their repos, their code, and there's a broader collaborative structure and transitivity between these types of things. So the Intersect as a members-based organization is very much just like Hyperledger or the broader Linux Foundation, in that it becomes kind of a master of managing these types of concerns. And so it gives the option to the dApp developer to have a place to go, partially or completely, to embed different programs within. Just super cool if you think about. And what's really nice about it is, as Cardano's governance gets bigger, what's going to happen is that governance is, when we talk about funding buckets, that governance can actually provide consent to provide funding for some community projects which are deemed to be essential. And that is how you build a self-sustaining ecosystem that's self-reinforcing and truly decentralized. This is hard-earned. It's come from over 6 years of talking to Apache, the Linux Foundation, talking to open source experts, watching what's happened in the cryptocurrency space, and trying to balance all of the different needs and powers. And it is a good initial starting point. There's minimum viable governance. Well, this is minimum viable structure, but you always must have the ability to design, just here, to control, here, and execute something. You always have to have an operating system that provides you that means. You also have to have an ability to take the people who are already doing great and exceptional work and put them into a structure where it doesn't slow them down dramatically. They just continue working on that. And what's really cool about this is that because of this structure, it's very easy to add many new companies or the existing companies to the repos and into the work system. Okay, so you have input output infrastructure. That's the company we've been setting up to roll the engineers into. It's a subsidiary of Input Output Group, the big company, and they just do the Cardano engineering. It's a highly specialized group. They've been doing it for years, and the bespoke leadership specifically to be the best contributor. But then you have others like the well-typed. That's, for example, Duncan Coots' company. He's been around since basically the near beginning. You have the Twigs of the world. You have the Galois and many, many, many others. And they have a common frame because now they can sit and they have one backlog, a nice diversified tribe style structure, and working groups to work through with the community. And so then eventually you can have many community groups like M Labs and the DC Spark and others come for the things that they care a lot about. So maybe they don't care too much about, for example, core technology, but care a lot about sidechains, for example. And what that does is it gives a place for them to decide what level of participation from actual development to design and discussion of priorities to actually going down and managing things and building things and deploying things and verifying that those things are correct. But we keep our principles because we're working from implementation agnostic specifications. We have a rich certification process that allows a diversity of clients, and there's a government that removes any ambiguity of whether something is in the pool or out of the pool. So where and when that's required, they can ask for that, get it done. I think this will be, according to the EDI, the most decentralized and inclusive development process in our industry, because no one can ever be shut out just because somebody isn't liked or they're a competitor. You can always join the MBO with or without being part of the MBO. You can get credentials just by going through a self-certifying process. Everybody gets to see the same backlog and understand the reasons and justifications behind it. There's a clock ticking on a quarterly basis, the PI cycle and release cycles that these projects have. So the community gets to see continuous progress. And part of PI is the post-mortem. So the government of Cardano gets regular reports and gets to understand things. There's at any given time an unambiguous blueprint. So everybody understands what the reference is. There's a SIP process, which is inclusive. You don't have to be a member of Intersect to participate in it. In fact, it's managed by the Cardano Foundation, a different organization. But yet it is an integral component to these kinds of discussions. And it's very easy to add and subtract entities to become developers, which means when we talk about funding buckets, the Cardano treasury can be opened to add specialized firms to accelerate the roadmap where and when that makes sense, or to augment the existing firms to have more time materials developers to work on that common frame of reference. Now, is it perfect? No. There's a lot of overhead in trying to get all these pieces to work just right. Is there a lot of backlog of things that need to be done? Sure, but that's the point. 2023 is about getting that minimum viable government in place, and 2024 is about getting that execution vehicle and operating system completely polished and then refining the government to accommodate for that new beautiful thing. Every year it gets better, more open, more transparent, which means that it gets more decentralized. So you have an improvement on your decentralization index that is measurable. And that is a transparent thing to the entire community. So if you get knocked in the head and fall into a coma and come back 5 years later, you'll see enormous progress made, and everybody feels like they're actually part of something. It's all working together. This is probably the hardest thing I've ever tried to participate in my career. And no one has pulled this off in the cryptocurrency space, not Bitcoin, not Ethereum, no one. It's very easy to do parts of these types of things, and there's legacy models to do these types of things. But to do all of this as one bucket, as I said, it's like changing pilots in a fighter jet while you're in the sky. It's not even changing tires on a car while it's driving. It's a very complicated thing. But what's truly extraordinary is it's actually happening.